Thank you. I'm pleased to introduce to you two people who will be speaking tonight. Christy McAlooper is our very new Michigan chapter Great Lakes organizer who has a really interesting history of being a teacher of science at East Point here in Michigan. She is a union organizer, has worked with Clean Water Action, and now she's working with us in the Sierra Club, and I'm really excited to hear her discussion of PFAS. Also, we have with us Brian Stecklitz, who works for the City of Ann Arbor. He's a professional engineer, and he is the manager of the Ann Arbor Water Treatment Plant. And I think that he has some insights into our local water, immediately local water, that will be of interest to all of us. So I welcome you both, and let's give them a hand and get started.
So, over here. I think that I will need to be over here for the presentation. So, apologies, sometimes I like to pace. I have a tendency to talk too fast. I've been told this my entire life. I'm still working on it. If I start talking too fast, just flag me down. I'll try and slow down. So, just apologize preemptively. So this is the first time I've done this whole presentation. I'm going to do a bigger picture look at PFAS from a little bit of a national perspective. And I'll go a little bit into local stuff happening here in Michigan. But we have on hand Brian, who is going to be able to tell you a lot more than nuts and bolts of how people are trying to deal with local solutions. So we'll get started. All right, so just a show of hands, how many people in the room are just hearing about PFAS for around the first time? Or is this something that you're really familiar with? So, hearing about it for the first time? One hand. Okay, so most of you have a good sense of what the issue is. So for those of you that are new, there's a lot of information out there. I won't need to look into it. PFAS are a class of chemicals. It includes literally thousands of chemicals. Their key characteristic is that they're fluorinated, which means you have long chains of carbon and usually fluorine linked together. The qualities of these chemicals, again, a class of thousands of chemicals, is that they are non-stick, waterproof, grease-proof, and fireproof. So they're used in thousands of consumer products, everything from mascara to Gore-Tex. So toxicity associated with PFAS. So there is a little bit of debate about the toxicity. However, there was a study called the C8 study, you can Google it, in which it's one of the largest epidemiological studies ever conducted on human health. And in that study, they found very clear links between PFAS, thyroid problems, cancer, digestive problems, colitis, immune system suppression. So children who have high levels of PFAS in their blood tend to not actually immunizations don't work as well in children that have high levels of PFAS. Organ damage, and there are serious concerns about pregnancy and the exposure of women and children to PFAS. So this is a map. As you can see, it is from 2018. There were 172 sites across 40 different states at the time. The credit for this goes to the Environmental Working Group. You can check out their research here through Northeastern University. So as you can see, the problem is really widespread. For some perspective, this is where there has been testing done. So in a lot of places, they're just not testing for PFAS at all, and we'll go into the reasons for that. But in places where they are testing, this is what they're finding. And has anyone seen The Devil We Know, that documentary? Only one person? Okay, I highly recommend that documentary. One of the data points that they lay out in The Devil We Know is that PFAS is found in almost universally in human blood. So we all have PFAS in our blood. It is a global, widespread, bioaccumulative toxin.
What was that title?
The Devil We Know. It's on Netflix. So if you have a Netflix subscription, you can go and watch it. So in the environment, where it comes from, AFFF, firefighting foam. This is foam used at military bases, in airports, fire stations, and oil refineries. I don't know if you guys heard, sometimes they catch on fire. Industrial sites, in paper and packaging, any greaseproof paper that probably has PFAS in it. Leather, you guys might be familiar with Wolverine Worldwide here in Michigan. Plastics, metal plating, that is the source of the PFAS contamination here in Ann Arbor. And then landfills and biosolids. So any leachate coming out of landfills has PFAS in it because PFAS is in thousands of consumer products. So we discussed where we are exposed to it. So drinking water, Brian can tell you all about that. Luckily, you're not as exposed to it here in Ann Arbor. Food, it does bioaccumulate. So PFAS first came on my radar screen because the Department of Natural Resources issued an advisory for any deer caught within a 5-mile radius around Clark's Marsh. And so that's when I first started paying attention to it. That was a couple years ago. But it does bioaccumulate up the food chain. Textiles, I mentioned Gore-Tex, for those of us that enjoy the outdoors, that amazing waterproof clothing, well, it's PFAS. And then food packaging, microwave popcorn, but obviously a lot of different other types of food packaging as well. At the federal level. So, right now there is a voluntary ban on 2 of the big long-chain PFAS chemicals. It's my understanding that they are not in production by 3M or DuPont in the United States. That was a voluntary ban. And when industry decides to regulate itself, you know it's probably pretty bad. There is a 70 parts per trillion non-binding drinking water advisory level at the federal level. In Michigan, we took steps to actually put that in practice at the state level, but at the federal level, quite frankly, it doesn't really mean anything. It just makes it a little bit easier for lawyers to fight over who's responsible for PFAS contamination. There's absolutely no oversight of how PFAS is used in consumer products. There is movement at the state level, but at the federal level, we've seen nothing. There's no control of facility emissions, so where the stuff is made, to the air or water. And there's no reporting of releases because it's not regulated. So, our goals. We would like to ban all existing uses of PFAS chemicals. Shoot for the sky. We would like them replaced with non-toxic substitutes. So, with the phasing out of PFAS and PFOA, there are lots of shorter chain substitutes that have been put into the consumer chain, and they have really similar health effects. So you might hear about Gen X, and we haven't really adopted the precautionary principle and shown that those don't have similar health effects in people. Protective cleanup standards. So some regulation of how these chemicals are actually dealt with and cleaned up. Polluter pays. Really key. DuPont and 3M have made billions. They should pay for this stuff. Safe stockpiling and disposal. We'll get into disposal. There was a national Sierra Club call that I was on where the folks on the call who have a much higher bench of understanding than I do that were joking that PFAS is actually a new element because we can't get rid of it and break it down. So that was a little confronting. And then make communities whole again. So that means providing for the healthcare and ongoing fallout from people who have been affected by this chemical contamination. All right, so we have a picture of Andrew Wheeler. He is currently the head of the EPA. He has made some noise about starting to regulate PFAS. The short story is, I doubt he will. So as I said, this is what we want. It is really unlikely that Andrew Wheeler is going to direct the EPA to give it to us anytime soon. So given that, here we'll go back. We can take action at the state level. So at the state level, Sierra Club chapters, what can you do? We can have better drinking water standards and testing. So the city of Ann Arbor has been doing some absolutely fantastic work with testing and water monitoring. We can end the ongoing uses of AFFF. The fire marshal for the entire state has done a really comprehensive inventory of where this firefighting foam is. And the city of Ann Arbor has actually gotten rid of all of their AFFF firefighting foam. They have done amazing research in partnership with the water department, as I understand it, to make sure that their substitute has absolutely no PFAS in it. It's not just shorter chain. And it cost them a fair amount of money. It was $10,000 just to dispose of the PFAS that they did have. However, it goes to show that if there are the resources available, we can mitigate the amount of PFAS that is going into the environment. Obviously, money for cleanup, again, polluter pays. Medical monitoring is really important. The human health effects of those that have been exposed to high levels of PFAS are really quite heartbreaking. And then strict liability for toxic releases. Again, more attempts to hold polluters accountable. So this is where we are nationally. So we've seen some movement in Michigan, as you can see. We have 40 current policies in 14 states and 11 adopted policies in 8 states. So we are starting to make headway. They're not in effect yet. So these are states that actually have a PFAS limit that is enforceable when it comes to a drinking water standard. So I'm happy to share this presentation with anyone if you would like to dig into it a little bit further. But you can see here with Michigan, we have our 70 part per trillion, which is the combined standard for PFOA and PFOS. And this is the health advisory that the EPA recommends. Michigan is using it to actually provide monitoring and testing for the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team. And we'll get into how Governor Whitmer is actually working to strengthen that. But right now, that's where we're at. 70 parts per trillion, though, is not actually, we don't think that it's protective of human health. So, water standards. So that's the EPA health guideline. These are parts per trillion. Minnesota, which is the world headquarters of 3M, that's the standard that they've adopted, just a little over 60. We have New Jersey there, about 30. Vermont, about 20. Vermont, I believe, was also at one point manufacturing PFAS if they aren't still. Independent scientists think that this is about the amount of PFAS that we can be regularly exposed to and not see cumulative health effects. So independent scientists are taking a much more protective approach to setting drinking water standards than our current regulatory agencies. So this is a quick bar graph of Americans that are actually drinking PFAS-contaminated water. So the EPA will tell you that we need this updated. You have about 6 million Americans drinking PFAS-contaminated water. The DEQ here in Michigan says that at least 1.2 or 1.5 million residents of Michigan are drinking PFAS-affected water. So if Michigan's making up 1/6 of that whole map of the U.S., I find that a little bit questionable. According to the state of Vermont, there are 15 million people. And again, we have independent scientists who say that there are over 100 million people in the nation who are drinking PFAS-affected water. And the sites of PFAS contamination, we're still getting a more comprehensive list, but closed industrial sites, airports, and potentially farms and groundwater. Those are all the different ways that you could be exposed to PFAS. So we have had progress specifically on working with firefighters. I mentioned that the city of Ann Arbor and the firefighters in Ann Arbor have done great work to protect the public from PFAS. Firefighters are actually our natural allies in this. So if any of you happen to know any firefighters, please give them my phone number. I'll have it up there. I would love to talk with them. We're working on building a coalition of firefighters around the state. They're trusted public servants, and they are usually one of the most highly exposed populations to PFAS because they have to work with it, and it's in their clothing. So other states have inventory stockpiles like Michigan, and some even collect it for disposal. The state of Washington has actually banned AFFF foams. And they also work to limit the amount of PFAS, which is not AFFF, but PFAS in uniforms. So that is the best standard in the country. They also, as a part of their strategy, they got the firefighting bill through. They also banned the use of PFAS in food packaging along with that. So, which was a great step for Washington. So Colorado currently has an AFFF bill moving through its legislature. It bans training with PFAS firefighting foam within 6 months, which is great, and is meant to ban all sales of PFAS foams by 2021. There's some exemptions that are being negotiated. So that's great news in Colorado. And we're going to go to Michigan. So I think I mentioned it really briefly, but Governor Snyder, when he was in office, put together the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team. It is all the different state agencies, including the Department of Agriculture, the DEQ, the Department of Health and Human Services, and some others that I'm missing, working together to deal with PFAS responses. So there's a hyperlink there. Again, I can share this presentation if you're interested. It provides you a map from the MPART website. However, the map from Michigan Radio is actually a little bit more updated. So interesting to compare the two. And it has detail on the different locations where they have found it. So far, they've spent $1.7 million testing in Michigan. 1,114 municipal systems have been tested by the DEQ. 119 of those have some PFAS. 461 schools, 152 daycare centers were tested, and there are 59 that have shown PFAS. So that's where we're at with municipal water. Groundwater is a different concern. So the big PFAS hotspots in Michigan that you have probably heard about. So Parchment, Michigan. There's surface and well water contamination. The Kalamazoo River ran through the landfill that had dumped paper-making waste. Remember I mentioned paper-making? And lots of different companies used it. Georgia Pacific, Graphic Packaging International, Green Bay Packaging, etc. So in terms of polluter pays for this one, the question is ongoing. We have a Sierra Club member whose nephew lives in Parchment, and he and his wife recently had their blood tested, and their PFAS levels are so high that they are considering not having children, which is a shame. All right, I won't tell you all about Ann Arbor or the Huron River watershed, but Tri-Bar Manufacturing. So they're an auto parts manufacturer. They were a major source, I think the major source of PFAS being dumped into the Huron River watershed. And the effluent from the treatment plant contaminated drinking water. This was also the case in Lapeer. Lots of other sites too, for that matter. Firefighting foam in Oscoda, Michigan. This is another hotspot that has gotten a lot of attention. It's the closed Wurt-Smith Air Force Base. The community there is dealing with PFAS contamination just under 70 parts per trillion. So what that means is that the Department of Defense is refusing to actually come in and do a proper cleanup for the community because they're just a couple parts per trillion shy from that lifetime health advisory from the EPA, which is really a shame for the people that are affected in that community. There was also a forest fire in 1987 and a bus garage fire in 1995 that contaminated the drinking water. So this is a flag. Other Air Force bases in the state of Michigan: Selfridge, Battle Creek, Sawyer, Alpena, and Camp Grayling. Those are all a concern as well. I know up in Grand Traverse, the Grand Traverse Bay area, there was a tire fire as well that is a source of pollution up there. All right, so what Governor Whitmer has done. So she took Governor Snyder's executive directive to establish MPART, and she made it an executive order, which essentially makes it more permanent and provides ongoing funding. So MPART is directed to recommend changes in law. That will have to, of course, go through the state legislature, and everyone will fight over it. They can, however, develop protocols for communication, create goals and timelines, and continue to advocate for affected communities as much as they can. Recently, Governor Whitmer has directed the FDEQ to set a maximum contaminant level, MCL. I think I got that acronym right. So she has convened a scientific advisory panel, and the members of that panel have been named. I believe they are all from outside of Michigan, right? Yes, they're all from outside of Michigan, which is interesting. They are meant to be done by July 19th. and they're supposed to have their recommendations ready in October. Sorry, July of 2019. And then they're supposed to have their recommendations by October. I have JCAR next. So JCAR stands for the Joint Committee on Administrative Rulemaking. This is a body that has members of the legislature on it, and they review any of the administrative rulemaking that comes from the executive branch. So it sounds really boring and dry. Long story short, Governor Whitmer is trying to set a standard that will actually keep us healthy and safe, and it's going to potentially get snagged in the Joint Committee for Administrative Rulemaking. Hopefully not. So the governor can also make budget requests. So we have a request to get funding to establish PFAS for food and soil. This is a particular concern. So we are, there were a series of stories nationally about dairy farms. So there was a dairy farm in New Mexico that had to be shut down because the livestock had been contaminated by drinking PFAS out from groundwater. And there was also a dairy farm in New Hampshire, I believe, and the cattle were contaminated because the field where their feed was grown had been fertilized, or I shouldn't say fertilized, it had biosolids applied on it. Biosolids are the solid waste left over from wastewater treatment plants. We mentioned that PFAS bioaccumulates, so biosolids, which are spread in all 50 states, all have potentially very high levels of PFAS in them, depending on the waste that's going into that wastewater treatment plant. So concerns about PFAS in the food chain are very real, and we should follow up on them. So boilerplate, that's a way of allocating funding in the budget. Alternatives for PFAS used in chrome plating. So there is research out of California for alternatives to chrome plating. Industrial processes, really boring, we don't need to go into it. We would suggest $150,000 for the study to be conducted. It is worth noting that a lot of the alternatives on the market are still PFAS. So remember how I mentioned there's thousands of chemicals. So we would really push to look for alternatives that have no PFAS in them. And then obviously more budget allocations for PFAS impacted communities. I've been to Muskegon, Grayling, Traverse, and Rockford to talk to PFAS affected communities. And the number one thing that people ask me is, how can I get my blood tested? That's what people are most concerned about, which makes a lot of sense. And I think that our government owes it to its citizens to actually follow up on those concerns. So I mentioned lawsuits. The Sierra Club is not prioritizing a litigious strategy. It's worth noting, though, in Minnesota, 3M settled for $850 million due to PFAS contamination associated with their plants. In Michigan, there's a lot of legal action going on, but there's a class action suit against 3M for the parchment pollution, and Wolverine Worldwide is being sued for its pollution associated with the Rockford Tannery, and now Wolverine is suing 3M. So that's ongoing. We'll see what unfolds there. New York is suing companies for making HLF. In Alabama, drinking water utilities are suing the companies who make PFAS. And in West Virginia, there are class action suits by people who have been drinking contaminated water. The documentary I mentioned, The Devil We Know, focuses specifically on the legal strategy that wound up helping residents in the Ohio River Valley. I think the most heartening story from that documentary is that literally all the people that were named in the class action lawsuit gave up their money, and they put the money towards the epidemiological study I mentioned that actually made the concrete links between human health and PFAS, which is pretty awesome. Human beings can collectively do the right thing. Just going to mention it. I already have twice PFAS jokingly referred to as a new element. We can't get rid of it. We don't know how to yet. So if it goes into a landfill, it's going to come out as leachate. Incineration does not break it down and produces even more toxic chemicals. Deep well injection, not really great. There are some technological breakthroughs on the horizon. I don't know enough about them. They're not at scale to deal with the problem, so disposal is a huge issue for PFAS. I've also had members ask me, what do I do with my filters when they're contaminated, if they're filtering water in their homes? And then at the municipal level, we've got contaminated filters too. I'll let Brian talk about that. But disposal is a problem. Really, the solution is not to make it in the first place, right? That's the long-term solution. The problem with disposal is not going away anytime soon. So I mentioned allies. So affected communities, of course, firefighters and organized labor, and municipal governments. So water utilities and municipal governments are really on the front line of dealing with this. So these are our natural allies in working to hold the corporations responsible who have profited off of this crisis in the first place. So what you can do, you can join a toxics committee. Especially if you have expertise on science and environmental regulations. You can join our clean air team if you have any interest in getting more expertise on disposal, air permits, and any sort of transfer across air, water, and soil. And then, obviously, you can get involved with anything that national staff is doing. So we are going to be going to Washington, D.C. We're going to organize people here in Michigan, especially in affected communities, to go to Washington, D.C. in May. And so this is really going to go from the local to the national level. So if you would like to get involved, specifically on PFAS, I work on other things too. All my contact information is up there. I have been giving my cell phone out to literally every single person I've ever met for like 20 years, and I've never had unwanted phone calls. So please take it down, pass it out. If you're at all interested in the advocacy side of PFAS, I would love to hear from you.